So I will start doing the introduction so that we don't finish late. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the webinar section of the Design Management International Program at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Art. And today we are honored to have Mariana Amatullo with us. I will briefly share with you her bio. I will be reading her bio, and then Mariana will start her presentation. So Dr. Mariana Amatullo is Vice Provost and Academic Dean of Continuing and Professional Education and Associate Professor of Strategic Design and Management at Parsons, the New School. Mariana has a 20-year-long trajectory in senior executive administration positions in art and design education. She is an experienced strategist, award-winning educator, and practitioner-scholar. Mariana's research and teaching bridge the art of design education and management disciplines and examine the role of design attitude as a cognitive approach to social innovation and organizational learning. Initially trained as an art historian and curator, she has been a pioneer in developing the design for social innovation field, where she remains an active scholar globally. Before joining the New School in 2017, Mariana co-founded and was the helm of the Social Impact Award-winning program Design Matters at Art Center Colors of Design in Pasadena. Mariana publishes and lectures internationally about design and social innovation, serving on various executive, editorial, and advisory boards in design and the arts, including the board of Aalto University in Finland. She is honorary president of the Cumulus Association, a Salzburg Global Fellow, a fellow with the Royal Society of the Arts, and the recipients of the inaugural 2012 Dell Social Innovation Award for Outstanding Social Innovation Education. Her latest publication, Design for Social, Her latest publication, Design for Social Innovation, Case Studies from Around the World, co-editor, she's a co-editor with some colleagues, presents an overview of the design field for social innovation through 45 global case studies. Her upcoming monograph positions design as a leadership capability for the 20th century. Mariana holds a PhD in management, designing sustainable systems from Case Western Reserve University, and an MA in art history and museum studies from the University of Southern California, and a license in letters degree from Sorbonne University. I didn't know that, Mariana, where she also studied art history at l'École du Louvre. A native of Argentina, and the child of a diplomat, Mariana grew up around the world. Something that for our students is also important is that she has studied with Richard Buchanan, who is a person that we follow a lot in our bachelor. And the book is a book that I really recommend both to our students and community. You can see it here. And it has a wonderful introduction. I think that is fantastic, the text and the notions of design that are reflected in the books. Thank you very much, Mariana. And please free to start. Feel free to start.
Thank you, Guillermina. I want to thank you for this invitation. It's wonderful to join you all. Thank you for that generous introduction. Lecturing virtually in Switzerland is special for me because Switzerland is close to my heart. I lived as a child in Geneva when I was growing up due to the work of my father at the UN in Geneva. And Switzerland remains an amazing place that I admire deeply, of course, for the work it's pioneered in design. So I put together a presentation today that hopefully will be informative and can give you some insights into this field of design and social innovation, but also some of the theoretical work and research I've been doing with colleagues and with research teams, and really at the intersection of design and management, which I know for all of you tuning in as students, design management is this field that you are seeking to specialize in and practice as you move along your studies. So let's get going with the slides. So really a warm welcome, and I'm joining you from New York, very close to, this is one of our buildings at the new school in the Village, in the heart of Manhattan on a gray, wintry day. The talk outline today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the complexity we have to manage in this global context, the implications for design management. I'll share a bit about the book that Guillermina was mentioning that I co-edited, and close with some reflections before we go to Q&A. And as we look at the question of complexity, I just wanted to at the really to take a couple of minutes to add to the introduction, not to dwell too much on my background, but to give you some insights on the kind of POV, the perspective or the lenses I'm bringing as I'm talking to you all. And this is a slide that sort of summarizes a lot of the points that Guillermina mentioned in my bio. It's a visual map that sort of looks at, sharing with you that I really bring a very international lens to the work I do since my upbringing as a child, but also in my interests in terms of my research and work. I also bring a very interdisciplinary perspective to the design field as an educator because of my early training in literature and in the arts and museum studies. And my work in museums, which was the first part of my career before I encountered design education, has been very influential. I tend to think about design projects very much like a curator, and even my publications take a curatorial lens. So I'm always very interested in translating ideas in ways that can hopefully, make an emotional connection with readers, with students, with colleagues. And that comes from that curatorial training I had early on. And then I'm extremely curious as a scholar, as a practitioner, and that's why I tend to get involved in many networks, and that gives me great joy. And the work of Design Matters that Guillermina mentioned, the work I did at our center for 17 years, where I co-founded this program, continues to carry a lot of weight in my trajectory because it was an opportunity in the United States where design education was really getting more serious about the intersection with social justice issues. And it was amazing with the Faculty of Art Center, an institution that is in Pasadena outside Los Angeles, a really amazing reputation as a craft and maker community. It was a great opportunity to look at this question of impact and social impact and bring together many organizations over my mandate to work with students and do projects of all kinds. And that was very fulfilling. And my role with Cumulus for 9 years, 6 in the board and 3 as president, was also very exciting because it has given me the opportunity to make a lot of connections and understand design education from many different institutions around the world. And that work continues in terms of my connection with Europe. I am 4 times a year at Aalto in Finland and remain very, very honored to serve in one of the most inspiring, I think, institutions for design in Europe right now, at Aalto Arts, as well in my role of trustees, as a trustee. So publications, that curiosity I mentioned, I continue to put forward in writing and in research. And we will talk about, how we frame this book with my co-editors, Brian, Jennifer, and Andrew, and a bit. And I am now working on a new book that I'm very excited about that brings together some of a collection of very celebrated designers around the world who have been at the forefront of design for social innovation. So I am just at the start of doing a lot of interviews and putting that research together this summer for a publication next year. So I framed this talk around the idea of complexity, and I'm coming from the New School and from Parsons, and this is the mission of our university. And you can read it on the screen, and you can see that it really acknowledges complexity at its root. As a university, we're a university of about 10,000 students. Half of our university is art and design, Parsons. We have more than 5,500 students studying with us, where I'm a professor at Parsons, and it's a very international body of students in the heart of New York. But we're really very committed to this mission statement of understanding, contributing, and succeeding in a rapidly changing society. And we will be seeing how that really weighs strongly in the work I will be talking about today. And this has been really part of our university's DNA since its founding. John Dewey, one of the American philosophers of education, was one of our founders in the early 20th century. And Dewey once said, we live not in a settled and finished world, but in one which is going on and where our main task is prospective. So that acknowledgement of complexity and uncertainty really at the root of how we have to think about our task as artists and designers. And Parsons, who was the first director of the School of Design, Frank Alva Parsons, has another quote here that I wanted to share because it sort of, again, shows you the legacies of my institution in terms of really connecting the enterprise of design education with industry and with this idea of making an impact and connecting to people and to the world at large. And that that history is important. And I think when you're talking to speakers and visiting institutions, it's always interesting to understand, the current work vis-a-vis the work that has come before. And in our case, we're probably the largest art and design institution in the United States within a university environment that's quite specific because we are very strong at the New School in social science and very committed to the social justice mandate. And that defines all of the degrees and programs we have at Parsons, very strong emphasis on social justice. So this is one of the reasons I came to Parsons after leading Design Matters almost 7 years ago, that commitment. So continuing this conversation around complexity, if we pause and sort of scan the world around us, we know we are very much contending with a new decision-making landscape, right? We know that there are many inconsistencies and contradictions at multiple system levels in technology, in health, in finance, in energy. And that really means that we feel more vulnerable and more exposed. And the level of concern we have to have as designers and as design managers for the future of our lives, for the future of our planet, really has a lot of significance and weight. We are very much the inhabitants of a very fragile planet. And scientists are talking really at the decade we're in, midway now, the 2020s, as the decade of determination, meaning we have a new consciousness that the idea of mitigating for the climate emergency we live in is no longer sufficient, right? Questions of sustainability are at the forefront for all of us, whatever our discipline is, because it's no longer about mitigating. It's really about adapting and conserving and finding new solutions for the future. We also are coming out as a global society from a very catastrophic, really, pandemic that we all lived, that we all experienced with different levels of urgency. And it really made, I think, very visible something that the great theoretical mind, Horst Rittel, coined with Max Weber, wicked problems, which we will touch upon in a minute, once said that society increasingly operates prefactually. And I love that quote. It's from a short text he wrote at the end of his life, The Reasoning of Designers, that you can find online and that I strongly recommend, because he was already pointing to this idea that all the facts that are around us, even with a lot of data and access to data, are no longer sufficient, right? The events of the world, the complexity of the world moves faster, and that linearity and the expectation of knowing all the information to act is often not the case. And COVID-19 really made very visible this idea that there was no playbook for action and that we had to take many decisions to contend with the emergency. And of course, in this background, technology and the acceleration of technology is both an opportunity, a very exciting opportunity, as we're seeing with generative AI, but also brings about many questions about disruption, about ethics, and how we adapt and contend and design for these new systems that are moving very, very fast, as we also take into account this global blueprint for development that we've had and that I'm sure you're very familiar with, the sustainable development goals, and really how we think about all of these issues from health to systemic poverty that are really weighing hard in the world. And all of these issues that the SDGs represent are really symptomatic, right, of the wicked problems we talk about a lot in design management. This idea of problems that are nested and interconnected and really qualify for incredible opportunity for design to intervene and manage, especially since we know that change is inevitable, right? Change is among us, change is inevitable, but that doesn't make it any easier. And again, this 21st century is known as the era of mega changes, and it requires more and more an aptitude to be flexible, to adapt to the new normal, and to collaborate. And my sort of offer to you is to say that art and design disciplines are, and the creative fields in general, are really positioned to address this change with a leg up, so to speak, in terms of success. And there, as we look at this context, right, the big question that I ask myself as an educator and as a design scholar all the time, and that I'm pursuing in my research and publications and in my classes, is always, what are the implications, right, for us in design and in design management as we think about strategy and as we work with other industries. And I like to start from a perspective of optimism and agency. And there I also am extremely inspired, like Guillermina mentioned, by the work of a very dear mentor who chaired my dissertation. And the reason I really went back to school and got a doctorate was to study with him. And that's the work of Richard Buchanan. And I love this definition of design that he offers. It's from a text he wrote on design ethics a few years ago. And the reason I love this definition is because it singles out design as a field of inquiry and practice, connecting with the idea of humanity, right? Dick will say design is the human power of conceiving, planning, and bringing to reality all of the products that serve human beings in the accomplishment of their individual and collective purposes. And this is a powerful definition, right? We love, as researchers and scholars, as Guillermina knows, to debate different definitions of design. And I'm sure you do so in your classes as well. I love this definition because it's a very macro. And again, it really connects to this idea of intentionality that design brings. Um, it's also making something from nothing and really serving a human purpose in its most collective way. And that's how I tend to depart when, as a point of departure, when I'm doing research about design. I also wanted to offer you this wonderful statement from one of the great management gurus of the United States, who continues to have a big influence in the academy and in management. And that's the work of Peter Drucker that you may be studying in your program or may have been encountering. Peter Drucker was a very pragmatic management scholar. He spent a lot of time in his writings. His writings were really the outcome of research, action research on the ground, and in speaking and observing management. And he has this beautiful quote that I share because it really, I think, points to, again, a place of agency and optimism. He would say, right, the task of leadership is to create an alignment of strengths, making our weaknesses irrelevant. And in management, in the field of management, especially, I see it with many of my graduate students who are already doing consulting work around the world. And with the work I do in executive education, we tend to look at the deficits. We tend to come in and look at the gaps in a company or in an organization. But this quote sort of invites us to think about, let's not just look at those gaps. And if we do, let's look at them from a perspective of asset-based change, right? And I think that comes together with this idea of design, thinking about what is possible. And it comes together with design for me because design is very much about those relationships. It's a relational discipline that allows us to really open up very generative conversations for discovery, for engagement, and for decision making. And we know the great news about the work these days in design management is we know we're at a moment where there is a recognition, right, of the role of design changing and going, as we say here in the United States, upstream. There is a recognition that design is a lever for innovation and customer value. This is pretty well now documented and proven, especially in the design industry, design corporate world. We are also seeing an uptake of how design methods and design tools are recognized as capabilities to contend with this complexity, the VUCA world, right? The volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. That's the acronym VUCA that stands for. We also know that design is celebrated for bringing strategic direction, brand value, and positioning in organizations. And finally, we also see increasingly designers invited to foster collaboration and understanding and facilitate and bridge different silos in organizations. A lot of the work at Parsons in the program I teach in, which is a graduate program in strategic design and management, is really educating our students to be those facilitators in organizations these days. Another interesting trend that I see in design education from my research and work with designers around the world, and especially now if I think about change and positive change and social innovation, is that the geographies of power globally are shifting. And this is interesting and important to think about, especially when we come from a lot of privilege in institutions in the United States and in Europe. There is a big set of discussions now, right, that recognize very, very important work in the Global South and in indigenous practices that are informing how we're thinking again about how we sort of codify the role of design. And there are many scholars talking about this. One of them that in a book I highly recommend if you're interested in these questions is from the great Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar, right? Who says, well, we want a world where many worlds can fit. So understanding that the canons of design that really governed the 20th century are ones that we're questioning, and we're saying, okay, there's not just one way of seeing how we practice and make design. So these boundaries of design are really changing. They're going from the functional and the beautiful, which of course matters a lot, and we should never give up on the aesthetic dimensions of what we can make, but they're really helping us think about framing arguments and decisions. And this is, I think, where a lot of the work you're all studying for comes in terms of design management. And it's an exciting moment because also the leadership roles for designers are changing. This is a lovely sort of diagram inspired by the work of Kat Drew from the Design Council in the UK that I think shows in these 4 quadrants, right, the ability of designers to really be system thinkers and conveners, decision makers, and storytellers. And in the complexity that I framed, why these capabilities matters, they matter because we are always contending with, okay, how do we prepare for a better future? And here I'm sharing a diagram from a wonderful book called Free Horizons, a little book by the American Bill Sharp, who does a lot of work around systems. And he talks about the future and having free horizons, right? And he says, okay, we sometimes think about the far future as an area where there's very emerging signals of new things to come. And this is for sure the case with technology. And one of the interesting ideas that I think Sharp shows us is that how the signals of that far future, they're already present in this first horizon. They're really present in the now. And as designers, I think, and strategic designers and design managers, I think we have to become very adept at working with these fluid horizons and at knowing how we might be able to anticipate that third horizon in the work we're doing at the present. Only then can we really think about transformation and innovation. So in summary, right, design is very much the implications of this complexity is that design in this 21st century is very much a process-centered and holistic approach to systems and to innovation. And it really allows us to create resilient and equitable systems and futures and integrate with a role for nature that I think is really urgent. And we have in design methods and the design methods you're studying very effective forms of inquiry. You're for sure very familiar or will be familiar with a double diamond and this idea of really connecting relationships and leadership and storytelling in the work. In terms of my own research, I wanted to sort of pause a minute and talk to you a little bit about a concept that is less well known as the concept and the tools of design thinking, and that's connected to the title of this talk, which is design attitude, the design attitude concept. This is a construct I've been doing a lot of research on for the last 10 years, since coming to Weatherhead as a doctoral student. And it's an important concept, I believe, to understand, especially if you're in design management, because it was not coined by designers. It was coined by 2 important professors of management and information systems that I've had the privilege to study with, Richard Borland and Fred Callopy. And they talk about design attitude after spending time with a very important and prominent designer, the architect Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry was invited to come to Cleveland, where Weatherhead School of Management is, to build a new, beautiful building with that a donor had seeded. And in the work these professors did with Frank Gehry and his team, they started really observing the process of design, right? From this very innovative architect, Gehry. And they concluded and they became fascinated by all the prototyping and the iteration and the experimentation they were seeing in the work. And this was a time where management education, early 2000s in the United States, was really showing signs of crisis in terms of ethics, in terms of innovation and direction. And they concluded in seeing this work that they said, well, if managers, if we were training and educating managers to be a little more like designers, we would have a better world, basically. That was sort of the conclusion. And they put together the symposium, and there's a book, Managing as Designers, as Designing, that you might find in your library. Dick Buchanan was one of the people that wrote for this book. And that's when they started really putting out this idea of a design attitude concept. And I like to think about it as picturing, with a metaphor of a tree and in opposition of a decision attitude. So if we think about a design decision attitude, we tend to take up apart all the leaves of the tree, right, to get up to one solution and making a decision. A design attitude is the contrary. You have that tree that is full of leaves because to get to a decision in a design process, we tend to generate many, many, many possibilities, right? And that sort of encapsulates a little bit the difference in how cognitively we set up ourselves to problem solve. The work I did was to extend a lot of the empirical and research that qualitative research that existed around this concept of design attitude. And when I was writing up my dissertation, because I was trained as a doctoral student in management in the United States, you have to master a lot of statistics and do quant research. So I was able to build scales and really surveys and put together the first sort of way of measuring this concept of design attitude and proving that actually when you have teams in a project with designers and folks with design attitude, you have the possibility of better outcomes and the opportunity to innovate. So part of my research was really taking this concept and building these scales and demonstrating these 5 dimensions that you see on the screen. And I'd like to talk about them just briefly. And I invite you to, read a little bit more of my work if you want to go deeper. But in these 5 ways of thinking about problem solving, we see in design attitude the ability designers have of connecting multiple perspectives. So making meaning out of a lot of different data points. We see the concept of creativity, of course, that we talk a lot about. The concept of ambiguity tolerance, how we're able to navigate uncertainty and change with a lot of flexibility. The ability of design to be multisensorial and really engage with aesthetics as a door to function. And finally, the 5th dimension of design attitude is empathy, something we talk a lot about as a superpower of design. And the concept of design attitude is really powerful if you think about another very, very important frame that I'm sure you're studying, the 4 orders of design of Dick, and how we have seen design advance over time from an industry that is contending with symbols and signs to products, to experiences and services, and to systems. And now you also see in the theoretical literature of design work that is also thinking about maybe perhaps a fifth order of relationships. This is the work of the researcher Marzia Mortati out of Polimi, where she's taking and extending the work of Dick Buchanan. So a lot of the design attitude capabilities I offer, are really important when you get to that fourth order of design. I'm going to shift gears now and just briefly mention how I see sort of conceptualized design for social innovation and share a little bit about the book. So of course, the work of Ezio Manzini and this book, Design When Everybody Designs. And Ezio has really, through the Design Network and his work over the last 30 years, done a lot to advance the field of design innovation and really bring many of us in different universities around the world together to show different approaches we have for this field. This is a multidisciplinary field, and in my own research, I've used this diagram quite a bit that I like a lot from the early 2010, that this was work across several universities in Europe that produced this TEPSI program report. And I like this diagram because it sort of shows you quickly how social innovation is about many different things, right? It's about grassroots, bottom-up work. It's about co-production, and it's about collaboration, establishing new relationships. And at the core, social innovation is, of course, about the novel, but it's really about impact and implementation. And those two areas, right, of implementation and impact in the community, that ability social innovation has to say, well, we can enhance society's capacity to act, is really core to the research and the work I do. And this is where the frame of the book that we did that took us about 3 years of research to produce this book really comes in. So this is a book that we organize with this hypothesis that the field of designers working in social innovation is maturing. And we were really interested in understanding how they're making a living and how these practices are sustainable around the world and how they look like, right? So that was where we started. We had a wonderful international editorial advisory board that helped us source case studies. We also had a really bottom-up approach and did a lot of case study analysis where we included in this book many diverse geographies of projects. We wanted to have different scales of work. And we produced a case study template that we put out through a website and got a lot of projects in, 182 projects between advisors and this case study call, and ended up choosing 45 of these projects. We had countries represented in a pretty in a pretty holistic way around the world, but only the representation of countries was not the only criteria, right? What the key driving criteria for us was impact. And it could be big scale, small scale, but we wanted projects that had been implemented. And here are some of the questions we asked. We took a very sort of academic approach to collecting data because we wanted both qualitative and quantitative data. And we were very honored to work with an amazing design team, 2.nets, that created a very visual way of putting all the data points of each case study in these flower diagrams that have different ways of summarizing the information. And we actually also shaped a little app So if you go into the website of the book where you can read for free the introduction, you can also access this app, put in your own design for social innovation project, and it will generate a flower for you. So you will put in maybe information about the team size of your project, how much funding it has, if you know that, what medium, and it will create a flower. So the process of putting together this book was a very grounded process where we had all the case studies, then we clustered the ones we wanted to select. And from that selection, we arrived at the 7 subjects or themes that we saw emerge from the data. And that created the 7 chapters of the book that you see here. And then we invited practitioners and scholars to have a conversation with us that we called roundtables. And each of us as editors moderated those conversations virtually. This was during the pandemic. And that makes these different dialogues that you see in the book outside the case studies. And so this concept of power and geographies of power and how power plays out in a design project was one of the themes. Work in international development. We had many projects with UN and NGOs was another theme. Measuring impact was a theme that came up that I was very interested in due to my own research in design attitude. I'll share just 3 very quick case studies because of time constraints, but I invite you to look at the projects in your library and dig deeper. So again, all of the projects were implemented, right? And so there were projects that have been documented before. Design Harvests is a project out of the work Tongji in Shanghai has been doing for years now. That has been very exciting in terms of looking at the different relationships between urban China and rural China, and how do you produce a new economy, a circular economy, and a set of enterprises that recognize design and in these boundaries, right? So very, very well-documented case study and very interesting case study that Professor Lu Yongqi and his colleagues have pioneered. And if you go to one of these case studies, again, you will see a write-up and you will see the flower and the different data points for each project that we collected from the case study. Another project that I really love in this book shows that connection between indigenous design and social innovation. This is El Calendario del Mundo Wixárika, and it's another project that connected a university set of researchers with a rural community, coming up with this new tool to really show the importance of different conceptions of time for a community that has had of rural workers, and how their conception of time and harvest, changes compared to our Western conception of time. And they created, through a very participatory design practice, this artifact that was really widely celebrated by the community and implemented. And again, you see the level of funding, very modest project in terms of funding, but really wonderful results in terms of its impact and uptake in the community. And then there are some massive scale projects that we have in the book. And this is a project with UNICEF and the UN called You Report, which is really an app that brings citizen journalists and the voice of youth at the center of the system of the United Nations and its regional offices, and connects real-time data with opportunities for UNICEF to intervene. So very large project that has, really been very influential in the digital space and uptake of the UN system since its launch. Now concluding a little bit around some of the findings and reflections of the book. So out of the collection of data, we had some interesting data insights. Some were surprising, some were less surprising for us. In the collection and in the sample we had in this book, we saw a lot of design for social innovation projects having real success in the areas of policy, social justice, health and wellness. And this diagram just shows you, the different areas we were surveying in terms of projects we were receiving. Another interesting finding, a lot of people that are practicing successfully in the area now are not coming from a design for social innovation background necessarily in terms of their education. They're coming from other fields. And, this might be changing slowly as we see more programs and more emphasis on the specialization of design for social innovation. But by and large, it remains a very multidisciplinary group of people that are leading this work. We see a lot of work happening regionally, and this is important, right? There is an interesting idea of working in your own backyard that matters. As an insight that is not surprising, but perhaps a little bit concerning, is that the investment in these projects, by and large, continues to come from the public and social sectors and less from the private sector. So corporations, private sector investment in design for social innovation is still not at the level perhaps that we would want it to be. And another interesting insight as well is that the teams of designers, really trained designers and design managers involved in these projects, the size remains small. So you might have a very large project like the U report at UNICEF with a very large team of folks, but the people that are really trained in design are not many. And finally, this idea of where kinds of mediums are happening, right, for this kind of design. A lot of it is in that fourth order. It's about organizational design, experience, services, digital, less so about posters and toasters, as one of my colleagues would have said. And an exciting finding for me as a researcher who loves to think about measuring design, people are measuring the work they're doing. Designers are taking it very seriously to be accountable for the work they do. And increasingly, they're using quantitative and qualitative methods to understand the impact of their work. And I think this is an exciting finding and a sign of maturity going forward for the field. And, again, less surprising, the idea of finding the resources and the funding to do this work does remain top of mind, and it can continue representing a challenge. It is not easy to practice in the field with all the resources one might need to make a difference. So I'm going to leave you now with some hard-won lessons that especially now speaking to all of you as students in the room, in the virtual room, that I take from, these 20 years or so of working with students and working with very successful designers around the world in the space. If you're going to follow this path, there are some things to try to put on your toolkit that might help you succeed. The first one is you need to leave hubris at the door. You have to be humble. It is not easy to try to do this work, with an attitude of being the expert in the room. Even if you have that expertise, you have to show a lot of humility as you engage if you're called to intervene and to create something, there are very important questions to ask, right? You have to ask yourself, is it needed? Does it work? And will it get to those who need it? This is really important in social innovation. And these were very important sort of recommendations that come from a wonderful foundation in the United States called the Mulago Foundation, who has done breakthrough work in design for social innovation around the world. So if you're a consultant, a design management, a consultant working in the global South, for example, ask yourself that question. Is it needed? Does it work? Will it get to those who need it? Third word of advice is thinking systems and levers for change. Where can I intervene and have the most impact, right? In that system, map the system. There's always doors that open up. And part of a good design strategist and design manager is knowing which doors to open. Some you'll find more resistance in, some you'll do better with. Interrogate always unintended consequences about the recommendations you make. And finally, persevere. This is not work that's easy, and it's okay to fail and fail better and do it again. And remember that learning what the problem is the problem. Again, to close with Horst Rittel, learning what the problem is the problem. Thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you very much, Mariana. To the people that are listening, you can ask questions through the Q&A. And there is already one question, and that is by Jorge Frascara. Okay. Jorge says, one of your first images show how design can transform organizations. This is the main focus of design management. So I am interested in your elaboration of the three main skills required for this task.
Thank you, Jorge. So I would go back to that recommendation about leaving hubris at the door. So humility, I think, you know, it's always for me the entry point in terms of how you then craft engagement. And perhaps the others are really connected to the design attitude framework that I've researched for so long. Specifically, this idea of ambiguity tolerance, right? How do you maximize the ability to contend with uncertainty and then still be effective and perform in that uncertain area? And the third one might be empathy, the celebrated skill set of empathy, because it does really, it is work. Transforming organization does require understanding the sort of anxiety and fear that a process of change will inevitably produce. Being empathic about that sort of set of emotional triggers that will occur, and then really facilitating going beyond it. So hubris, being humble, tolerating ambiguity, and being empathic of that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Jorge Hirter is asking, we have a collection of Jorges in the school. We are currently talking about these topics of doing design in the ways in which you have described. What advice can you give students about positioning themselves to do design management in organizations?
Yeah, that's a big question. I was just launching my graduate seminar yesterday at Parsons. We just started the semester, and we were talking about my graduate students about some of the goals of the seminar for the next 15 weeks. And I had a variation of that question from somebody who was saying, well, you know, we're learning all these amazing tools and we're having all this knowledge, and then how then do we translate it and you know, and get traction once we join an organization. So this question of positioning is difficult, and My advice is, it's important to do that work of mapping, right? And understanding once you enter an organization, where are the places where those levers might exist, and not start with the most difficult place, but and start with small projects. I think that the work of educating and demonstrating and the proof of concept matters. So I often finding a champion in the organization for you is important, number one. And number two, starting small, maybe it's a small sprint that you help facilitate, or a small tool that you share, um, and then gaining a little bit of credibility and going from there. So not being too lofty, and starting small.
Thank you. Sophie is asking, what are crucial areas to consider when wanting to measure impact of interventions in a system? Excellent question, Sophie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a difficult question, right? It really will depend on the intervention. I like to really go back to the intentionality of that design brief, what it set out to do, and try to understand, did it meet those outcomes? Did those outcomes sustain over time? Were there unintended consequences, right? So really mapping from that point of the intentionality of the project, and really getting beyond the design conversation and understanding, right, the impact with the community of users or stakeholders that you may have directed that project. Sometimes you are surprised. You find that the impact was very different, that maybe than the one you intended, and that's okay, right? And that can be insightful.
That's a very good point, that sometimes the impact cannot be predicted, and is an issue even for us researchers, that when writing a research proposal to national grant agencies, need to anticipate what will happen. And I think that particularly in design, it is difficult to anticipate what will happen. And if we were to know, perhaps we would not be doing the research. So some of us in the program are fond of the work of Nora Bason, and she is working with this coalescent aspect, this of warm data, trying to see what happened in relationships, particularly in the context of organizations. You were talking about the skills of collaboration, the skills of mediating, facilitating processes. And those things are very difficult to capture, in not just in numbers, even in qualitative data. So that's a skill that I think that not only students, but designers would need to start reflecting upon, and saying, how within this design attitude, how do I go about and measure impact? Do you have any suggestion about that you can share?
So how to measure impact when you don't know necessarily
how your design intervention is helping this organization. So in what way
right.
are groups working better? So we are mediating, suppose we are mediating the work of the school with the Canton Lucerne. So
Right.
what will happen? How the Canton Lucerne will start now changing, and how our own school will start changing and we start collaborating. So that change is difficult to anticipate.
Yes, and I think, I may not be answering exactly the question, I realize, but I think your question points to one of the big the big challenges of this research and of this work and of these interventions, which deals with the concept of temporality, right? And timescales and timetables.
Yeah.
And the timetable that it might take us as a design team, right, to develop and propose an intervention is never going to square with a timetable where you will see that intervention unfold and then be able to get to outcomes in the community that you can measure. So I think one of my approaches is to first recognize and state and sort of state that this that gap, and acknowledge it very, very clearly. And from there, I think that generates an opportunity to really look at the many methods we have to evaluate and start mapping different kinds of qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods, tools that might not be the same in that spectrum of time, but that you can start sort of offering as an opportunity to show the kind of rigor and accountability you have as a team. So that's how I go about the process. And I think it changes depending on the project and the circumstances. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one more question by Omaima. And it says, thank you, Dr. Amatullo, for this presentation. I'm focusing on social innovation in my thesis and working in the field of new craft. During my research, I interview many experts and work with artisans with the aim to further collaborate with organizations. I find it difficult because many entities provide commercial solutions. What is your thought on this and advice to me?
Well, it's an exciting field, the field of, and there's a lot of work out there and some very inspiring work around the world of designers working with indigenous communities and working with craft. I know currently at Parsons, my colleagues who are doing this work are very focused on questions of power and social justice. That drive the approach and how they do this work, how they present this work, how they conceptualize their research. It's very different than the dilemma you're encountering around the commercial nature of this. We talk a lot in at DCIS, for example, Parsons, of this, how do we develop methods that are less exploitative and extractive in doing this work. So I would encourage you to perhaps read up a little bit on the people that are publishing about this. And they are in many places beyond Parsons. I'm not one of the experts in this area at all. I just recognize that there's very healthy and exciting, positive developments on dealing with some of the work you're mentioning. So I would encourage you to do a bit of scanning of what's happening.
And on Maima, I would recommend that you contact a Jorge Mesa in La Ibero de Mexico. He works with these type of topics, and he might be able to also give you advice. One thing perhaps to think about is, were these commercial organizations included from the beginning in the discussion? So where were they incorporated? That will be something that I will think of. Jorge Hirter writes, in your findings too, you said that social design is taking place through non-design disciplines. What is the contribution of the design manager in this process?
Yes, and I should nuance that, right? It is happening also in the design disciplines. It is what I meant to say. It is happening not only with the designers involved or designers only involved, right? So it's really very much a multidisciplinary field, and it's evolving and it's changing as we speak. And I think as we see more programs like the ones you're leading, and others, we're going, we are having a new generation of people who are really very well trained to lead in the space. But it's still a moment, I believe, of transition. And what is the contribution of designer? Again, I think it's hard to answer that in a short answer because the there are so many. And you have on one hand, I would say, right, that the famous sort of statement, design is not only the purview of designers, right, by retail. And then on the other, the recognition, and I think that's why we're all educators in the spaces of design management and design. We believe in this discipline, right? We believe, back to Dick's definition of design, the unique sort of cognitive capacities design brings, the skills, the tools to navigate this complexity and this opportunity to make a difference. And for sure, this is an expertise that I believe is essential. And I'm, again, very, very inspired to see all of the work happening around the world that is continuing to push the discipline upstream and forward. So thank you.
Mariana, you mentioned one of the skills, and I love it, is knocking at doors. So try to open who is a person that will open, and that is a skill that I think is very relevant. Do you think that hence we can conclude that courage is another skill that is required?
Yeah, for sure, right? And we've talked a lot in design about having creative confidence. So for sure, creative confidence and courage, I think, are essential.
How do you go about developing this creative confidence in young people?
So, I know that for myself, I have developed creative confidence by working hard and studying hard with very smart people and surrounding myself from, being curious. So I think the ability of being curious, inquisitive, and humble, and really listening, deep listening, is really important. And then practicing, right? Practicing, failing, practicing again. That connection to the empirical, to the field research is so, so important.
Yeah.
And not staying only in the abstraction of the models and the theories. Even if they're amazing, having getting yourself out there and talking to people and observing and being in the field, I think does develop over time. You develop a little more expertise, and that helps you develop creative confidence.
Good. Thank you very, very much. It has been lovely talking with you and sharing this hour. We have passed the hour. I'm aware of that. Sorry about that. So we can close here and we'll let you go to your activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely questions. And I wish you all a wonderful evening and week ahead. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Good afternoon for you. Bye.